Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Tuesday, July 23rd, 2024, and today we are going to be talking about the battleground state of Georgia and its 16 electoral votes that could make or break the 2024 presidential election. A new poll out today from Landmark Communications, an A-plus rated pollster and heralded as the state's most accurate and best pollster in this state, Georgia showing Donald Trump with a 1-point advantage over Vice President Harris. Now, what these numbers show is a complete change from the trajectory that we saw under a President Biden versus former President Trump rematch. The Georgia numbers were not strong for Democrats in, quite frankly, any regard. The 2024 numbers in Georgia between Trump and Biden showed Joe Biden losing to Donald Trump by 4 points overall. And we saw that for months on end, Donald Trump maintained a consistent lead over the incumbent president. From November 5th, 2023, where Donald Trump started out with a 6-point advantage that only narrowed down around 1.5 points over nearly an entire year, Donald Trump led in to the removal of Joe Biden from the race with a 4-point advantage across the state. And we found here, too, that the numbers that we see in this brand new poll, Landmark Communications, showing Donald Trump with a 1-point advantage, stands to question whether or not Donald Trump's lead, not only in Georgia, will maintain itself in its head-to-head matchup, as the numbers show between Trump and Biden, but also other battleground states where Donald Trump has maintained a lead over Joe Biden, but now that Joe Biden is no longer a contender, what will these new numbers potentially show? Now, for a bit of context around the state of Georgia, back in 2020, Georgia went to Joe Biden by a margin of 0.23%. It was really narrow in terms of battleground states. It was the narrowest state in the entire country. And so Democrats looked at this and said, we have work to do for 2024. And yet, for 2020, we saw Democrats really scrambling and figuring out how they were even going to get here in the first place. So there wasn't much of a foundation to base off of. Georgia had gone for the Democrats for the first time since 1992. Bill Clinton was the last Democrat to win here, and then Joe Biden was able to win. By 2022, Democrats were able to maintain the Senate race there. They won the runoffs, of course, in 2021, but they lost the governorship by a pretty significant amount. And so when 2024 came around, Democrats were seeing that, they were still going to have to fight tooth and nail for this battleground state. In 2022, we saw that Democrats were able to win the Senate election there by roughly 2 points. Now, that isn't super strong. A 2-3-point victory for Democrats in 2022 actually underperformed what we saw in terms of statewide and swing state shifts from the 2020 election, but it was still a victory for Democrats. But again, continued to prove that more work needed to be done. But evidently, in a Trump versus Biden rematch, Donald Trump was able to take an early advantage over the incumbent president. An advantage that seems, even with insider advantage, they did a poll that was released recently, Donald Trump ahead by 3 points, the New York Times, showing Trump ahead by 4 points, Emerson, showing Donald Trump ahead by 6 points, Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Trump ahead by 5 points, Quinnipiac, Trump ahead by 5 points. I mean, we saw consistent numbers here. Some polls that even showed Joe Biden doing better than he did in 2020, showing Donald Trump in the advantage. And so Democrats were quite worried. But now, after Kamala Harris's announcement, we've seen not only a shift now in Georgia, but also a shift on the national level. A brand new poll from Reuters and Ipsos shows Kamala Harris with a 2-point advantage, and a brand new poll released between Marist College, NPR, and PBS showing Trump with a 1-point advantage over Vice President Harris, a reduction from what we've seen here, from what we've seen on the overall average of Trump being ahead by 3 percentage points nationwide. Now, cutting the lead in half is a starting point, but it's not how you win an election. But the numbers in Georgia actually might suggest that these are, in fact, winnable numbers. And let me explain to you what I mean. If you were to take all of the states that Joe Biden won by, what you saw, 0.1% or higher, right? We're just going to give him all the states that he won back in 2020. Let's go ahead and do that. Nebraska's second. The Rust Belt states, not Ohio. That has been that way since Obama and Biden were on the ballot back in 2012. Arizona and Nevada, getting a bit distracted here. Overall, we saw the numbers. 303 for Kamala Harris if that map was to hold true. And I'm sure Democrats would love to see a repeat of the 2020 presidential election. I'm sure they would love to look at that and say, we can win the same area as Biden did and have nothing change. They would take that. They absolutely would take that. Kamala Harris at 303, though, probably isn't the likeliest outcome today. But here's why this number shows that this might be a winnable metric for Democrats, or starting from a point where it can be far more winnable than what it was. For a reminder, if we were to take those states that Georgia polls under Trump versus Biden, Trump was ahead by 4 points. If we were to swing every state the way that Georgia was swung by in the head-to-head polls compared to how they voted back in 2020. For instance, Georgia swung 4.5 points to the right compared to 2020. If we were to apply that to all of the battleground states here, we'd see a red Wisconsin, a red Michigan, a red Pennsylvania, a red Georgia, of course, a red Arizona, and a red Nevada, bringing the numbers to Donald Trump to 312. But the new numbers out of Georgia, showing Kamala Harris losing to Donald Trump by 1 point, certainly isn't the best place to be. But let's go ahead and repeat that. If we were to shift all of the states that Donald Trump won by, 1.5 points, Joe Biden won by 1 point or less, we shift those states over, meaning a state like Georgia might go, Arizona might go, Wisconsin might go. But everywhere else, largely untouched. Kamala Harris would be at 266, and that could potentially be her starting point. Now, I'm not here to say that Georgia is all of a sudden a Kamala Harris state. I don't think that is the case whatsoever. But what I do believe is that the state's most, strongest pollster, the state that has had, really trusted landmark communications and understanding the electorate here, it really, really, really calls into question whether some other battleground states have also shifted as well. Because Georgia shifting by 3 points is also quite significant. Not only in comparison to the 2020 election, let's go back to where we were, but if we were to characterize all of the states that were currently being led by Republicans, Arizona, Trump was ahead Biden by 6. In Nevada, Trump was ahead Biden by 6. In Wisconsin, Trump was ahead Biden by 3. Pennsylvania, Trump was ahead by 4.5. In Michigan, Trump was ahead by 2.1. In North Carolina, Trump was ahead by 5.7. That would take all of these states and make them right-wing states. Donald Trump would be back at 312. But reminders, new numbers are out because it's a new candidate on the Democratic Party side. And compared to the overall average of Trump versus Biden, it's roughly a 3-point swing. Apply that to the numbers we have right now. Wisconsin goes back, Pennsylvania goes back, and then you start to see where Democrats can make a strategic move and play for Michigan that could bring Kamala Harris to 270 electoral votes. Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania will largely vote and come together in this election. But Democrats are making a play for states outside of that area. And Georgia's poll shows that not much support has been lost relative to 2020 when Kamala Harris is on the ticket. And that matters. Another thing we can use as a point of comparison is the final 2020 poll from Landmark Communications in the state of Georgia. Now, here's the bad news for Republicans. As much as Landmark Communications is largely seen as a very strong pollster in the state, they said Trump would beat Biden by 4.1%. Not only did they say it, but so did the average of the Georgia polls. The 4 most recent polls right before the election, Emerson College had Trump up by 1, Insider Advantage had Trump up by 2, Trafalgar had Trump up by 5, Landmark Communications had Trump up by 4. On average, Trump led Biden in the state of Georgia only to go on to lose. But Landmark Communications severely overestimated Donald Trump. If I was Donald Trump looking at a poll that gave me a 4-point advantage in 2020, give me a 1-point advantage today, I'd either, one, realize that the polling methodology changed and it probably got far more accurate, but also worry, because it is very possible that Landmark Communications may be missing the mark in Georgia, and Kamala Harris might be ahead. I'm not going to claim that she is, but this certainly does question whether Landmark Communications is actually underestimating Democrats, the same way it did back in 2020. But again, what I'm interested in looking at are these head-to-head, crosstab polls. What they tell us about the state of the race. This is the 2021, and this is the recent Georgia poll. Now, amongst young voters, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump run roughly even. A big change from what we saw back in 2020 when Donald Trump was losing to Joe Biden by roughly 7 points amongst this electorate. But where did Kamala Harris make up the margin? Take a look at the 65-plus number. Kamala Harris, Donald Trump, neck and neck. In 2020, Donald Trump won 65-plus voters by 19.2%. When you take a look, too, at some of the other numbers based on racial demographic, white voters backed Trump very heavily, black voters backed Biden very heavily. You see a very similar situation happening again in 2024. And while you've seen minute increases in black support for President Trump, you've seen significant increases in white support for Kamala Harris. And that matters too because white voters make up a higher portion of the population than black voters do in the state of Georgia. And Democrats need everything going their way if they are to win this battleground state again. I, again, want us to revisit these battleground states with new numbers out of Nevada, new numbers out of Wisconsin, new numbers out of Arizona, new numbers out of Michigan, new numbers out of North Carolina, new numbers out of Pennsylvania. And the good news for Kamala Harris is that this is only the beginning. This is without the Democratic nomination convention. This is without members of her team that will be joining over the next coming weeks. This is without a ground game strategy uniquely fit for Kamala Harris. This is without any running of ads. This is without, guess what, a vice presidential nominee. These new Georgia polling numbers show that Kamala Harris is, in fact, regarded as a more favorable and more likable Democrat on the battleground state front. And Georgia in specific is a state that Kamala Harris and the Democratic campaign believes she can mobilize youth black turnout, mobilize black turnout in this state, mobilize minority turnout at large across the country in the battleground state, and turn out enough voters to win the state of Georgia. And while maybe the numbers here show Donald Trump with an advantage, you cannot ignore the massive climb in support relative to where we were under the incumbent president. On top of that fact, too, the fact that Kamala Harris is just 1 point away in the state of Georgia means that a lot of other states are going to be far more competitive than what we might think. Because we can forget about the numbers of yesterday or 2 days ago or 3 days ago that said Biden would lose a battleground state by 8, 9, 10 points. While I never thought that was going to happen, it was certainly far more within the realm of possibility than what we see today. And that's because Kamala Harris is the better candidate for president. That's why Joe Biden decided to step down and allow her to take this nomination spot. Because not only is it clear on the national level, it's becoming increasingly clearer on the statewide level. That matters. Overall, I think we are in a position where Georgia, Arizona, a number of other battleground states have to make a decision and will use Joe Biden, not Donald Trump. But a lot of them will use Joe Biden as a point of reference. Because there were many voters out there that said, I want a Democrat over Trump, but Joe Biden can't finish out his term. I don't feel comfortable voting for him. Or maybe you have some left-wing voters who were turned off with Biden's policy surrounding Israel and Palestine. Maybe Democrats who were turned off by climate failures or climate inaction on the Biden administration front. There could be very many reasons why typical Democratic voters, Arab American voters, Muslim voters, young voters, whatever it might not be voting for him this time around or were not intending to vote for him this time around. That Kamala Harris not perfectly solves the problem, but certainly puts a Band-Aid on this problem. Something that can be fixed in the future, won't be fixed in the immediate, but is something that people should keep in mind, which just again goes to show that many of us need to understand that the Democratic Party under Kamala Harris has a far higher point of advantage than we otherwise might think. Kamala Harris has come into this race and completely shaken it up. We've seen it from leaked internal memos about Republicans scrambling about the fact that Kamala Harris is now in the race. Reactions from Donald Trump himself tweeting out on Truth Social talking about how he was in a position where they spent so much money and that they should get a refund because they spent too much money talking about Joe Biden and now he can just swap out the race. I mean, so many different things here. I think ultimately, though, these new numbers out of Georgia really do confirm many of the suspicions for Democrats that once Kamala Harris ends up on the nomination spot, or once Kamala Harris becomes the relevant Democrat for the national election, their numbers are going to get better. And again, only improved by her choice for vice president. She has the opportunity to make somebody her VP and bring a newfound hope and rejuvenation to this election. That is the purpose of the vice president. VP Harris has been in the White House for 4 years. 4 years, and has a track record that Republicans can attack. But it isn't super strong. By bringing somebody in, not only is she joining it up into a ticket, so a lot of news stories can't run independently. This isn't a focus just on her, but also two people. It's a journey, right? You're talking about how, people who are added into this ticket can offer a lot, because Kamala Harris, quite frankly, can have somebody who juxtaposes her, who adds to her electability. And you rarely ever see that. But Democrats know what they're doing. And Democrats know how to take this election and win this election. But they have to do it correctly. What we're seeing, too, is some shifts on the national betting odds. Statewide, nationwide, whatever you might be, the Democratic Party is getting far more confidence in them after Kamala Harris was chosen as as the presidential nominee. And while nothing is a perfect science, and I really don't want that to be the takeaway from this, that any of this is a perfect or predictable situation to be in, but that the new numbers out of Georgia show far more impressive results than what Democrats, in theory, should be polling at, given Biden's approval, given Kamala's approval, given where we are on the national stage. Democrats are doing much better than expected, and they have one person to thank for that, and that's Vice President Harris. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the top left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 presidential election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.